در پارلمان اروپا با حضور رئیس جمهور برگزیده مقاومت، فراخوان اروپایی آمریکایی برای حفاظت از اشرف و ممنوعیت جابجایی در داخل عراق. 4 خرداد 1390، 25 می 2011. ژنرال وسلی کلارک، اندرو کارد، بیل ریچاردسون، لورد پدی اشتون، زلیکو، سفیر دل دیلی، آلخو ویدال کوادراس، استرون استیونسون، جیم هیگینز، ادیت بایر، تون کلام، پاولو کازاکا، فراخوان اروپایی آمریکایی در حمایت از راه حل اروپا برای اشرف، حفاظت فوری و ممنوعیت جابجایی در داخل عراق. سیاستمداران اروپایی و آمریکایی در یک کنفرانس در پارلمان اروپا در بروکسل، سازمان ملل متحد، اتحادیه اروپا و آمریکا را به اقدام فوری برای دستیابی به یک راه حل درازمدت و مسالمت‌آمیز برای حل مسئله اشرف فراخواندند. شرکت کنندگان آمریکایی و اروپایی در حمایت از راه حل پارلمان اروپا برای اشرف اتفاق نظر داشتند و بر ضرورت خاتمه دادن به سرکوب ساکنان اشرف، از جمله خروج نیروهای عراقی از اشرف، لغو محاصره و شروع تحقیقات بین المللی در مورد کشتار 8 آوریل تأکید کردند. آنها افزودند انتقال ساکنان اشرف به نقطه دیگری در عراق نه عملی و نه منطقی و نه قانونی است و تنها زمین ساز جنایتی بزرگتر علیه اشرف است. شرکت کنندگان دولت آمریکا، اتحادیه اروپا و کشورهای عضو سازمان ملل را به اقدامات ضروری برای تضمین حفاظت اشرف و ساکنان آن، از جمله استقرار یک گروه ناظر دائمی سازمان ملل در اشرف و جلوگیری از انتقال اجباری آنها فراخواندند. پارلمان اروپا با حضور رئیس جمهور برگزیده مقاومت، فراخوان اروپایی آمریکایی برای حفاظت از اشرف و ممنوعیت جابجایی در داخل عراق. 4 خرداد 1390، 25 می 2011.
So, good afternoon to you all, and be very welcome to this meeting organized by Friends of Free Iran in the European Parliament to discuss on the humanitarian crisis in Ashraf camp. It is a great honor for us to host today at the European Parliament very distinguished American guests. I refer, of course, to General Wesley Clark, former NATO commander and presidential candidate, to Mr. Andrew Card, that was President Bush Chief of Staff, our very good friend Bill Richardson, where is Bill? Former Governor of New Mexico, former Secretary of Energy and U.S. Ambassador in United Nations, Ambassador Del Daly, former Coordinator for Counterterrorism in the State Department, and Mr. Philip Zelikow, former State Department Advisor. It is also a great privilege to have among us Lord Paddy Ashdown, former High Representative of the European Union in Bosnia. And indeed, Mrs. President, we are delighted to have the pleasure of your presence once again in this House, representing at the highest level the National Council Resistance of Iran. As you all know, we have given great attention to the protection of Ashraf residents since the first attack they suffered in July 2009. In fact, we have considered this issue a pivotal duty, and we have promoted several initiatives in past years. I want to mention our resolution in 2009 and our written declaration last year, and also several specific points included in other resolutions on Iran. I do not exaggerate if I say that we have devoted a lot of effort to make of Ashraf a priority in the foreign and human rights policy of the European Union. It has been a long and difficult struggle, but I can state at this stage that we start to see the first results. Better late than never. In the last plenary session in Strasbourg, Baroness Ashton referred widely to Ashraf in her opening speech, and Ashraf was also one of the points of discussion in the Council of Ministers 2 days ago. But we fight against time. On the intentions of Prime Minister Maliki, let me only remember you that the delegation of this Parliament that visited Iraq end of last April, chaired by Struan Stevenson, was not allowed to visit the camp in spite of the reiterated requests by Struan. We didn't get the authorization to visit the camp from the Iraqi government. At present, a very crucial development has taken place that must concentrate all our work from now on. I am speaking of the proposal presented officially and publicly by our delegation for relations with Iraq that is gaining wide support in this Parliament and in many national parliaments in Europe, and for which it would be of decisive importance to have also the support of the US Congress. But the Iranian regime and its Iraqi allies oppose to this European solution and are trying to forcibly displace the residents of Ashraf inside Iraq. The concept of moving the 3,400 residents of the camp to former US military bases elsewhere inside Iraq is simply not acceptable, as it would leave the refugees at the mercy of the Iraqi military. Forcible displacement is in no way a solution, and it has been made clear by US officials. For example, Mr. Jeffrey Feldman, the US Assistant Secretary of State, in a hearing at the House of Representatives in October 2009, stated, and I quote Mr. Feldman, "An Iraqi desire to move Camp Ashraf to someplace else inside Iraq could lead to bloodshed." The Iranian regime and Prime Minister Maliki neither want the Ashraf residents to go to third countries nor to remain in Ashraf. They are after a clear objective, which is the sheer elimination of Ashraf. Reaching these objectives is far more difficult when these people are in their present location, because the Iranian regime and its proxies in Iraq would have to pay a far higher political price, both regional and internationally. That is why they pretend to close down Ashraf and send its residents to a location where far less international attention would be focused on them. The excuse of being close to the Iranian border and so more exposed to being targeted by Iranian missiles is only a myth totally fabricated by the Iranian regime itself. This is the tale that Maliki, on behalf of the Iranian regime, is telling the US authorities in Iraq. Another element I want to touch upon is the misleading campaign by the Iranian regime and its Iraqi agents against Ashraf residents, claiming that PMOI has no support inside Iran. I have participated many times in the resistance annual rallies with the presence of 60, 70, or 80,000 Iranians arrived from everywhere in Europe, America, and other places. I have said many times that I have never seen such large audiences in the biggest gatherings in electoral campaigns of my own party in Spain. One, by the way, of the largest political organizations in Europe, with more than 800,000 registered members. And we have never seen such a gathering in our events. We would like to, but we have never been able to gather so many people. And the NCRI have done it every year, and we have been there, and we have seen it with our eyes. How could the NCRI hold such impressive events outside Iran and be irrelevant inside? Moreover, according to many Western diplomats and officials who have participated regularly in negotiations with the regime on the nuclear program and other issues, the suppression of the PMOI has been permanently the top priority of the regime in all these conversations. In my trip to Ashraf in 2008, I spoke personally with Iranians recently arrived from their country that confirmed the sympathy and support that the NCRI enjoyed in all layers of the Iranian society. I want to conclude by saying that we need to get immediate protection for Ashraf. These 1,000 women and more than 2,000 men cannot feel safe with all these Iraqi soldiers and officers who have already murdered 35 of them in April. Thank you for your attention, and now I would like to give the floor to the President of the National Council of Resistance of Iran, our very good friend, Mrs. Mariam Rajavi.
Thank you. Dr. Al Vidal Quadras, Vice President of the European Parliament, distinguished representatives, and distinguished guests from the United States. Dear friends, first, I would like to welcome the decision by the Council of Ministers on Monday to work with the UN and US to find a lasting solution for the humanitarian crisis in Ashraf. 48 days after the massacre on April 8, 42 of the wounded remain in critical condition. Despite the demand by the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, there is yet to be an investigation about this tragedy. In order to resolve this crisis, the first step is providing protection for residents of Ashraf. The Iranian resistance is prepared, as always, to lend any cooperation to resolve this issue. We welcome the plan presented by the European Parliament delegation for relation with Iraq. The European Parliament initiative also underscores that immediate security of the residents is the absolute requirement of a viable and peaceful solution. To avoid another tragedy, the EU should, in conjunction with the US and the UN, take immediate measures to protect the residents of Camp Ashraf. Under the circumstances, I warn that any forcible relocation is a prelude to massacre the residents. And I warn in advance that the international community and the US would be responsible for its consequences. In light of the Council of Ministers discussion on Monday, I ask Baroness Ashton to take all necessary measures to implement the plan proposed by the European Parliament. I also call on her to urge the UN to station a monitoring team in Ashraf and make the necessary arrangements in this regard to avert another massacre. The European Union and Baroness Ashton have the power and the means to do that, especially based on the principle of responsibility to protect R2P, which is currently being used in Libya and Cote d'Ivoire to protect civilians. I also ask the US, which has signed an agreement with each resident, to protect them, to respect its obligations, and undertake the necessary steps to guarantee the protection of the residents. To ensure success for the European Parliament plan, I urge the US, the EU, and the UN to undertake the following urgent steps. 1. Guaranteeing the protection of the residents until a final solution is found. 2. Undertaking the necessary steps to end the suppression of Ashraf residents, including the withdrawal of Iraqi military forces from the Camp Ashraf, removing the loudspeakers, and ending threats to murder the residents. 3. Ensure that the residents of Ashraf would not be relocated forcibly. 4. Recognize the legal status of the residents of Ashraf in accordance with international humanitarian law, human rights law, and especially the 4th Geneva Convention. Dear friends, the situation in Ashraf is part of the crisis in Iran. Growing public discontent has intensified in fighting within the regime. Khamenei's authority has been undermined and the regime has been weakened. Therefore, in order to counter this situation, mullahs have stepped up suppression and executions inside Iran. They are also intensifying their efforts to eliminate the democratic alternative to their regime, hoping that in the absence of an alternative, the current crisis will not lead to the downfall of the regime. The April 8th attack must be analyzed within this context. Given the circumstances, Iranian people expect more from Europe. We welcome the decision by the European Council of Ministers to add a number of individuals and companies to the sanction list. We also welcome sanctions of the United States against the Iranian regime. But these are not enough. It's time to stop buying oil from the regime. It's not time to start any round of useless negotiations with the mullah's regime. It's time to adopt a firm position and recognize the Iranian opposition. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Chairman, Madam President, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Do we need any further evidence on what we've just seen? Such cruelty, savagery, barbarity. We simply have to bring this to an end. I'd like to, first of all, say a word of welcome to our distinguished American colleagues. Your experience here is very important and very symbolic. And I'm also very happy to have here beside me Paddy Ashdown, who has unique experience on the international world stage, diplomatically, politically, etc. His prominence, his presence is highly important in terms of bringing a resolution to this tragic problem. As you know, we're here today to discuss the Ashraf problem. And I'm sure, as I was, that you're all appalled at the video footage that we've just seen, the attack that took place on the 8th of April. This moves me on to the issue of finding a solution to this crisis and ensuring that those residents are protected from further violent assault by Iraqi forces. And it is for this reason, distinguished guests, that I wish to add my wholehearted support to the European Parliament's proposal, which is called the Stevenson Plan, to solve the crisis once and for all. Having visited Iraq and discussed the attack with Iraqi officials, having been denied the right to visit the residents and to see at first hand what has happened, he has since put together a very sensible proposal which has been endorsed by our Iraq delegation, which can and which must now be the solution to the crisis, which all governments, including the United States, must throw their weight behind. First and foremost, it is clear that negotiations over the ultimate transfer of Camp Ashraf residents to democratic nations in the West cannot begin until Iraqi forces withdraw from the camp and allow the residents to receive all the necessary treatment, basic humanitarian right denied to them at this juncture. This must in turn be followed by a full, independent inquiry into this attack that we've just seen so graphically illustrated in the video, and the return of all the belongings and personal items taken by Iraqi forces during the attack. However, in the meanwhile, the protection of the residents must be guaranteed by United Nations-led force. For as long as Iraqi forces remain within the camp's borders, with their guns trained at the residents, then no meaningful discussions can be held. The international community, led by the EU, must now demand that a UN-led team take control as Madam President has said, over the protection of the camp. Any attempt to talk of displacement within Iraq must be immediately resisted and quashed. The international community, as has already been said, led by Baroness Ashton, President Obama and others, must now at last throw its weight behind the European Parliament's proposal to protect the residents and once and for all set the ball rolling to protect a group of Iranians to whom we all owe so much. And I want to stress this point. I also want to use this opportunity to call on the United States government to follow the example of Europe and remove the name of the PMOI from its black list. There is no justification to keep them on this list. This movement and its leader, Mrs. Rajavi, are the best chance of a truly diplomatic Iran. Mrs. Rajavi, as a competent leader of this opposition and as a great symbol for this big war against Islamic fundamentalism, from our experience in the European Parliament here, we know that the Iranian regime fears them more than anything else, and this should be enough for anyone who wants to judge them fairly, that the PMOI as a democratic movement which advocates a tolerant and progressive Islam is the real alternative to this fascist religious dictatorship. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vidal-Quadras. And I would like to say first that I'm very pleased to be here with this distinguished group of Americans who have come to, in the hospitality of the European Parliament, to discuss what I think is a very urgent and important problem and a critical opportunity for the West. I'd like to begin by expressing my sympathy for those who were in Camp Ashraf and their loved ones. I've seen this tape 3 times. It never fails to impact me very strongly. I spent 38 years in uniform. I helped negotiate the peace agreement in Bosnia with Richard Holbrooke, and I was the NATO commander, and I think I know a war crime when I see it. And I think there should be an immediate action taken by the International Criminal Court to investigate what happened at Ashraf. Above and beyond everything else, this has the appearance of a war crime. And it needs to be dealt with properly and legally. Just like every other government is responsible, so should the Iraqi government be held accountable. These were Iraqi soldiers. So every time I see this tape, I feel very strongly about this. Mr. Vidal-Quadras said that this is a race against time, but it's also a fight against tyranny. And I think that as much as the humanitarian concerns right now are the overriding issue, I think one cannot set aside the strategic imperatives that are present here also. The history is well known. In 2003, when the United States forces came in, we knew what the MEK was. We made relations with them. We promised them protection. If they disarmed, they disarmed. They received protected status under the United States and under UN authority when the United States. But I've seen no evidence that this is a terrorist organization. I've asked for this. None has been presented. I can see no reason why they should remain on the foreign terrorist organization list. None. After the 8th of April, people inside the government of the United States began talking about the inside Iraq relocation as a temporary alternative until an outside Iraq solution could be developed. Well, that solution has been developed. It's here in the European plan. And I think that it should be supported, not only by European governments, but also by the United States. And I commend the European Parliament and its delegation and Stern Stevenson for leading this effort, and for Patty Ashdown as well, to make this happen. I also endorse the idea of a UN team, and I would like to suggest that this would be an ideal opportunity for the European Union to take leadership in providing the resources for this team. I want to call again on the the investigation, not only by the United States and international authorities, but by the International Criminal Court to look at what happened at Camp Ashraf. I hope the United States government will move to support and in the meantime, to provide the medical treatment, the protection, and the investigation so that the people in Camp Ashraf can be treated and protected, and those responsible for the events of 8 April be held accountable. This brings me then to the strategic issue. It's well known that the Iranian government has a long, long reach. Iranian dissidents have been assassinated periodically over the years worldwide. The actions of the Iranian government in the Middle East, outside the borders of Iraq, of Iran, are well known. And it should be a real issue for people to ask, how can a group of 4,000 women and 2,000 men who are disarmed in a camp inside Iraq attract such focus from the Iranian government that they would put so much pressure on worldwide to attack this group? I was in a conference in Los Angeles 3 weeks ago, and an unofficial representative of the Iranian government, at least that's what he's reported to me, came up to me and told me and warned me about this group. It's a worldwide campaign against this group. Now, you have to ask yourself as a strategist, why would this be? How can this group be so powerful? If nobody in Iraq believes in them, nobody supports them, then why wouldn't the Iranian government just ignore them? Why make... So, it must not be true. This group could be the key to opening the third way of dealing with the crisis in Iran that is surely coming. Preserving these people and recognizing the extraordinary influence that they have, obviously, is not only a humanitarian imperative, it is a strategic imperative. Thank you.
Madam President, thank you for being here and thank you for motivating us. And I really thank our friends in the European Parliament for providing momentum to the motivation that you provide us to find action, because this problem has been talked about for a long time. When they met, when the MEK met with General Odierno, he said that he appreciated that they would be helpful, but in exchange for saying yes, the MEK received a promise of protection. A promise of protection from the United States, a protection that was recognized by the United Nations. It was a very important commitment understood by the United Nations. Unfortunately, the United States and the United Nations did not keep their end of the bargain. I believe that the MEK did keep their end of the bargain, and that they are allies in the war on terror, and that they did lay down their weapons. It would have been very easy to pull them out, or to reconstitute them to fight a battle that they didn't invite, that visited them on April 8th of this year. The evidence that we have seen of that attack on April 8th is undeniable. But the evidence is undeniable. And it is embarrassing to sit here and say that happened after a promise had been made. I'm also embarrassed because good people, strong people, who have not asked for help, they've only asked for protection, did not have that protection when they needed it most. The MEK are a wonderful people that have built not a refugee camp, but a city of hope that is remarkable. When you say Camp Ashraf, most people think of tents and people in poverty and people struggling. But Camp Ashraf is a vibrant city with schools and hospitals and educated people. 3,400 people, productive, adding value to their people and adding value beyond the community of Camp Ashraf. They can't be part of the world where they are. We have an obligation. I think every human being has an obligation to pay attention to the outrage that happened on April 8th. I think the United States has an obligation to feel guilty that their promise of protection wasn't kept, even when the obligation was transferred legitimately to the Iraqi government. But the Iraqi government did not meet any of their obligation. So we're calling attention to the challenge. We do have a moral obligation as a people. I think I have a moral obligation as an American to call attention to the problem and help to better understand the solutions. And again, the solutions will not be easy. And I compliment Representative Stevenson for the solution that you put forward and that the European Parliament has called attention to. But it's an important solution that should be considered. So I'm proud to be here. This is an interesting gathering of people with some pretty phenomenal titles. We have presidents and lords and generals and representatives and governors and ambassadors, and we have professors. But the truth is, there are 3,400 real live people who are good and are part of the solution that are denied a chance to be a bigger part of greater solutions that the world desperately needs. So I say, call attention to the problem. The media, where are you? Policymakers, where are you? The MEK is not a terrorist organization anymore, and they haven't been for a long time. Delist them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I remember being here in Brussels about 3 months ago, and it was a similar kind of conference. And the warnings were that there would be a potential massacre at Camp Ashraf, and it happened. You know, we're all politicians, resolution here, option here, but I think the video shows that human beings were massacred, and it was very clear who did the massacre. So the human side, I believe, needs to be once again emphasized. Well, the Arab Spring is taking place, and I think it's very healthy. We can't just continue talking and wishing. So the first step that I think has to be looked at is obviously that the European Union has taken the lead. And I believe we need to follow you. And here I think Sturan and Alejo and Patty and Paolo, all of you deserve enormous credit for making this trip, Sturan, for very clearly outlining options, for fighting, and so my hats are off to the European Union here. And I know there's always tension, the United States, the EU, you know, who goes first, but you've gone first and you've done the right thing. I want to also stress the MEK issue. We've talked about Camp Ashraf, but the MEK issue is sort of the vehicle to do so many other things to strengthen the opposition movement. And what else has happened with the delisting issue? Well, something good. The French judicial system coming out with basically a report saying that they've conducted an investigation. Initially, there were reports of terrorism, but there isn't any. I mean, that's the conclusion. French judicial system. What other steps have been taken? Continued valuable intelligence by the MEK about the Iranian nuclear program. What else has happened? The Iranian regime in Istanbul basically saying, oh, you want us to clean up our nuclear program like we agreed we would? Oh, by the way, we're not going to do it. in Istanbul. And so the rationale for a dialogue is gone. And so somehow, I believe it's important that we focus on the immediate issues. And I think, Sturin, this is why I asked for your memorandum that comes out with several very good recommendations. But have we exhausted all options to treat these human beings decently? I suspect we have. The other alternative that I heard of moving them around military bases in Iraq makes no sense. It makes no sense at all. I don't know why it's even on the table. And so what I believe we need is a combined effort of the European Union taking the lead, and I'm not saying the United States government should not participate. Obviously, we should, but we're a little behind on the policy. Get the United Nations, get some military strategists to come up with some ways that we can provide some of this protection. And then I believe what is needed is something that hasn't happened. Now, we have all these meetings. They're all very productive, bipartisan. Andy Card and I agreeing on something that's historic. But you have bipartisan support in the United States. You've got strategic leaders like Wes. You've got Zelikow, intellectuals. He's an intellectual, by the way. You'll hear him. You have broad base of support in the European community and the United States. So I think what is also part of the strategy should be a way to focus international attention on this. And I think it's important that obviously political leaders get together and do this. I want to just one more time to Alejo, to Sturin, to Paolo, to the Irishman, Jim, to Patty, great work. God, if you hadn't done this, I don't know where this issue would be. Your leadership has been great, and I wish I could simply say to you that everybody should listen to you. They should, but my hat's off to you, and Mrs. Rajavi, to you too, and your movement and your people, the people that are always back you up. Let's not be pessimistic here. Thank you.
Thank you, man.
My approach to this is to ask myself, if I was still in the job that I had held at the State Department, say back in 2006, and this problem was on my desk, what would I have done to solve it? What would I do now? What recommendation would I make to Secretary Clinton if I was still in my old job? And so that's the approach I took here. I'll start out with two observations. The first observation is about Iran. I want to second Patty Ashdown's opening comment about this, about the way in which you bring the Iranian issue into this issue. I came by those views from a variety of perspectives, including working on the effects of the Iranian proxy war that they were waging against our forces in Iraq, in which Iran supported, directed, trained operations that killed many U.S. soldiers, and I saw some of the impact of that very directly. So I have pretty hard views about the Iranian regime. I offer three suggestions that echo some of the things that others have already said as to what can be done. I actually think this is a doable problem. I think this problem can be solved, and I think the next 6 months is the period in which it must be addressed. First, I very much agree that it's a precondition for any effective solution for the United States to delist the MEK. And there's no need for me to recapitulate all the arguments on that. Del Daly is probably the most qualified person in this entire room to offer an opinion on that question, since he saw these issues on his desk operationally and had access to all the relevant information. So I simply am happy to skate along in his jet stream. But it's really important that you delist the MEK. The second major point then is clear acceptance, unequivocal acceptance, publicly understood acceptance by the people in Ashraf of the European Parliament-style proposal for voluntary resettlement outside of Iraq without any preconditions except those related to the safety of the people involved. Third point, as the United Nations must therefore say that it will do what it can to prepare the way for such a resettlement and accept the responsibility. The United Nations would then request protection from the United States forces. So the way the issue would be framed is the UN will do its best, and the UN has lodged a request to the United States government to provide protective forces for its mission in Ashraf that is taking the names. That will put U.S. troops back in Ashraf on the scene. That's the indispensable thing. Now you'll notice that I think an interim step of moving them someplace else in Iraq preparatory to this will actually be a huge and very costly diversion of energy that actually will make the problem harder to solve. I want to end by thanking the role of the European Parliament and of Mr. Stevenson and all the Friends of Iraq who've been joining with him and who are here around this table in their efforts. Your work actually may be indispensable. You're providing some of the diplomacy that may intermediate the discussions between the people in Ashraf and the United Nations that might actually help frame this issue and set it up so the issue can be resolved peacefully. Even if the EU can't provide the troops, the EU can provide a lot of the diplomatic energy and effort that could be the key to a solution.
The elimination of Camp Ashraf was first attempted 29 July 2009. It has been continuously squeezed till 8 April 2011. They view themselves justified in attacking Camp Ashraf. The terror list has brought Iran and the United States to being on the same team. It is confusing to ourselves and, more importantly, to the world. How can we be on the same side as Iran? And the terror listing must be stopped, and that's a message for Secretary Clinton. Take the MEK off of the list immediately. It is within her capability and hers alone. It is an executive branch authority. The United States and Secretary Clinton are confronted with two extremes in the foreign policy towards Iran. On one far side, there's complete and total acceptance of the status quo. On the other far side, we have forceful military actions to compel compliance by Iran. Most unfortunately, acceptance of status quo is the weak and ineffective imposition of 3 UN Security Council resolutions. On the other hand, the foreign policy to compel Iran into compliance is just not achievable now. The U.S. and allies are too consumed with Iraq, Afghanistan, budget and economic woes to start another military effort. Add those actions in concert with Libya, Bahrain, Syria, and one can see that the world is busy. And while all this is going on, it allows Iran to pursue its goal of regional dominance and continued development of the dreaded nuclear weapons. But please listen. There is an alternative, a middle way that will dramatically affect Iran, distract them from their unacceptable adventures, and potentially create a regime change, a democratic regime change in Iran. This middle way is merely the support of the Iranian opposition, the support of the Iranian resistance, the support of MEK. We can and should do so. They don't ask for anything. They don't want money, weapons, people, logistics, or other support. They just want to be able to restore their homeland by themselves in accordance with the 2004 Statement of Principles as spoken by Madame Rajavi. We must not stand in their way. The immediate revocation is essential. And we can do so because the petition remains with the U.S. government. The federal courts in July in Washington, D.C. directed the State Department to, quote, reconsider its opinion, unquote. The U.S. government already is 70 days late. The court saw no classified or unclassified evidence to retain the terrorist designation. The DC Appeals Court is consistent with the European Union, United Kingdom, and France, all of which have delisted the MEK within the past 2 years. There are over 130 congressmen who supported their delisting. A similar resolution with both bipartisan support are in both houses circulating now. Certainly the State Department can decide on an enlightened and informed and relevant foreign policy that protects the United States, the Middle East, and the people of Iran. Taking the MEK off the terror list is one thing that must be accomplished. The second is the protection of the residents of Camp Ashraf in accordance with the Geneva Convention, in which the residents are designated as protected persons. This protection should be led by the UN, UNAMIN, and security provided by the U.S. troops that would go to Camp Ashraf. We must stay engaged, stay strong, and stay relevant as a world power, and focus on the real enemy, Iran. Second, U.S. diplomats are recommending an internal relocation of the MEK and Camp Ashraf deeper into Iraq. This is really totally unacceptable. It is not a solution, whether it's temporary or permanent, if it stays inside Iraq. Finally, 2 weeks ago, the French government eliminated all, quote, terror charges originally filed against the MEK in 2003. This is a great victory for the MEK. As a result, this even adds to the compelling legal actions for the U.S. to remove the MEK from the terror list. Any exchange of intel on the MEK by governments during the time frame of 2003 or later should also be eliminated. The strongest U.S. war on terror allies, UK, France, and the Western nations of Europe, have taken the MEK off the terror list. We are compelled to do the same. In closing, we Americans as a nation must focus on our key objective, Iran. The MEK is the best dissident group, the best resistance group to prevail over the mullahs in Iran. Let's delist the MEK now. As the Arab Spring grows, let it this time be different. This time we must have a regime change to a democratic society in Iran. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I want to speak, if I may, of politics, of moral obligations, of legal obligations, of plans, but above all, of urgency. I will have some thoughts which I'd like humbly to submit to you. I'll have a message which I hope that Washington might be inclined to hear, and I'll end with a message that I hope the European Union may want to hear. First of all, let me say something which puts me slightly at variance with my colleague Jim Higgins and my old friend Wes Clark. There is politics involved in this, but I'm not sure it advances the case of humanity and compassion, a case which is based fundamentally not on politics, but on human rights of the people suffering desperately and under constant threat in Ashraf camp, to mix the politics with this. I'll be very blunt with you. I support and admit second place to no one in my support for the extraordinary courage and determination of those who seek freedom in Iran against a bitter and terrible tyranny. The single issue to me, and I shall return to this at the end, is the urgency to provide protection to these people. That is the single issue on which we should concentrate. If we succeed in that, if we succeed in finding real protection for those suffering in Ashraf, we open up the possibility to all the other things that we then wish to see. And I would believe that it would be better for us just to concentrate very fiercely on that thought. Let me talk first of all about moral obligations. And I hope Washington understands this. They have a moral obligation here, a direct moral obligation. If you saw that video, every single one of those slaughtered before our eyes on that video was carrying a personal certificate signed by Washington, promising to secure their protection in the future. It is difficult indeed to believe that, at least in that case, that is not a promise that has not been betrayed. A big word, betrayed, but Washington should understand that. And if this gets worse, ladies and gentlemen, and my view is it will, then there is a terrible burden of moral obligation that rests at Washington's door. Now, Washington says, well, we have put aside our legal obligations in this and we've handed them over to the Iraqi government. Well, maybe you can put aside a legal obligation. But ladies and gentlemen, you cannot put aside a moral obligation. And what is more, you cannot put aside the blame that will attach to Washington and no one else. Washington should understand, I hope they do, that handing over a legal obligation to someone else, even if you may do it, and I doubt that, does not remove you from the moral consequences and the blame of the world if that should happen, which God forbid it should in the future. My second point, Mr. Chairman, and not wishing to go on for too long, is the legal position here. Well, there are those who argue, and I'm one of them, that these refugees have the direct protection of the Fourth Geneva Convention for Refugees. It is said that they were granted the protections of the Fourth Geneva Convention because the place was at war, but once the fighting finished, that protection is removed. I can find no legal precedent for that concept. The refugees in Bosnia had the protection of the Fourth Geneva Convention. That did not end, as Wes Clark will remember, when the war finished. It ended when the condition of those refugees was assured in a proper and decent way, even beyond the days of conflict. And then there is a second issue, which I think Washington does understand, that it is illegal, allow me to say this again, it is illegal under international law to forcibly relocate refugees. It can only be done on a voluntary basis. Let me just remind you, if anybody, Iraq or anybody else, were to act to forcibly relocate these people, they will be acting in direct contravention of international law, and anybody who aids and abets that process by standing aside when they can stop it is at least party to that act. There is only one way that these can be moved, and that is on the basis of voluntary repatriation. So talking about voluntary relocation is a very important part of our campaign, it seems to me. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to finish now. There are plans. There are many of them. Struan's is one. So my message to the European Union is this: we need to get some monitors in there. I don't say a company of soldiers, though they'd have to be protected by the United States, of course, we understand that. Maybe that's an obligation the United States should fulfill, if others will take from them the obligation they gave to every resident to protect them themselves. It would require only a monitoring team in there to prevent this happening. Now, I hope that could be done by the UN. I find it impossible to understand why the UN refuses to do this. I'm told it's because the UN consider it too dangerous. I mean, I thought the UN was there to protect others from danger, not to protect itself from danger. But if it requires the United States detachment to provide protection for that, then let it happen, but let it happen soon. And I hope that the European Union, I hope Baroness Ashton, with whom I spoke earlier today on this matter, will now use the full power of the European Union to persuade the UN to take that action, and take it very soon. If that doesn't happen, but it's very much a second best, then I hope the European Union will step in and do it itself. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alejo. And can I add my welcome to all of our distinguished guests who've come across the Atlantic to be with us, and my good friend Paddy. I think we should go back to the beginnings. I think we have to unravel why we're here. Because we recognized the regime in Iran as the most tyrannical, the most dangerous regime in the world today. And these 3,400 people in Ashraf have been at the front line of opposing that regime. People who support the MEK inside Iran, where, by the way, it's a capital offense under the Constitution to support the MEK, where even parents of people in Ashraf have been executed for visiting their children there. These people have risked their lives and continue to risk their lives daily about what's happening in the nuclear program, about the preparations that they're making to provide delivery systems for nuclear warheads. And yet, how do we treat these people? How do we treat the MEK and the people in Ashraf? Well, We treat the MEK, the PMOI, by putting them on our terror list. It was Bill Clinton's initiative, and the reason was they were trying to appease the mullahs in Iran. That's been made evident. We've found the evidence to support that contention clearly in recent years. And when we challenged the evidence that was supposedly classified in the British courts, and that evidence was forced into the public domain, we discovered that much of it, huge volumes of it, in fact, were based on propaganda provided by Tehran. I mean, this was absolute rubbish. I would use a stronger Scottish word, but I think in present company, it was rubbish. Baseless, ill-founded rubbish. And the judges threw it out without hesitation. And of course, that then led to the delisting in Britain and then the delisting in Europe. And it's the same so-called classified evidence that has been used to sustain the listing of the PMOI and the NCRI in Washington. And God help us, the days of appeasement of this horrific regime in Tehran are long gone. Please, God, the State Department, wake up and listen to their own courts and take the PMOI, NCRI off the terror list in the US. That would make a huge difference. That would enable us then to take forward some of the proposals we've been discussing today. The Americans, as we've heard, withdrew from Ashraf, then the UN withdrew, and this was after a massacre took place in July 2009, which we warned before it happened was going to take place. We were ignored. 12 people were killed, dozens were injured. We warned again and again that this was a precursor to a bigger massacre. We warned vehemently when we saw the troop movements, when they started gathering around Ashraf in April. I was personally sending emails to the White House, to Cathy Ashton, to the foreign ministers around Europe, and we have to regard these people as human beings who require our immediate protection. Now, when I was in Iraq 3 weeks ago, just shortly after the massacre, we met with virtually all the senior people in government, apart from Nouri al-Maliki himself, who had gone to South Korea. And with President Talabani, with the Foreign Minister Zabari, with Najafi, the Speaker, with Masoud Barzani in Kurdistan, and senior members of the Kurdish autonomous government, we raised our anger and frustration and concern over Ashraf. Again and again, we said, this has been an absolute test of your so-called government of national unity, and you have failed the test. How can you sit back and allow a massacre like this of unarmed civilians to take place? And we were left in absolutely no doubt that the Prime Minister has taken the power of the Defence, Security, Interior ministries into his own office. Those ministries have never been filled. No ministers have been appointed. I went to Paris. Over 5 hours of meetings, we came up with an option. We have taken that option to the Delegation for Relations with Iraq. It has agreed. The Parliament agreed. This morning, I unveiled the option to the AFET Committee, the Foreign Affairs Committee here in the Parliament. They have agreed to it. It is receiving widespread agreement. It's been sent to Cathy Ashton. It's been sent to the 27 foreign ministers, to Barack Obama. It is widely now being circulated, and as you heard, the foreign ministers discussed it on Monday at their meeting. Cathy Ashton, after Monday's meeting, made another statement condemning the aggression against Ashraf and calling for a humanitarian approach to the 3,400 people there. I repeat what I said at the beginning. They would cede the resistance movement to the tyranny in Tehran around the whole of Europe and the West. What on earth are we hesitating for? And let's do it fast. Thank you very much.
I'm extremely grateful to our American friends for sharing and assessing our common responsibility for this issue, because it's one of the major paradoxes of international politics. Iran is regarded as a major threat to international stability and peace, and at the same time spreading terrorism throughout the region. The main opposition group is labeled as a terrorist one and blocked in its activities. And the common denominator of this situation is appeasement, as Struan has always pointed out. It's realpolitik, it's hypocrisy. But here in this case, I think there's a unique chance to combine moral responsibility and international strategy, because we have to address the Iran issue, and it's a major chance to do it now. As Wesley Clark has pointed out, the window of opportunity is some time to act, and Iran is ready for changes. It's a moral issue, and the people who stood for their freedom and human dignity unarmed deserve our respect, because otherwise they would have been loaded to the trucks already and transported to the prison camps or to Iran. I think we can take this moral lead once again. I'm very much encouraged by today's meeting, and I think for all of us and for the European and US foreign policy, Iraqi conduct toward Ashraf inhabitants is to be regarded as a test case for fledgling Iraqi democracy, for their respect of human rights. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We are responsible. We are responsible, and I am really very, very grateful to our colleagues who are coming from very far to support the common interest and collective effort to prevent humanitarian crisis in Camp Ashraf. I, as hundreds of our other colleagues in European Parliament, view Mr. Stevenson's initiative as possible proposal, welcomed also by Baroness Ashton. But I cannot imagine that we could allow that injured persons will not have any access to proper medical care, that responsible offenders will not cooperate, or Iraqi government will not cooperate with an independent international investigation into the crimes committed in April and May. The realities on the ground and surrounding the camp support one irrefutable truth: any enforced relocation of the residents will lead to a greater humanitarian catastrophe and therefore cannot be practicable or long-term solution. At the end, as a chair of European Parliament Solidarity Group with Women for Free Iran, I would like to sincerely wish the best for all those courageous Ashrafis who are holding the beacon of hope and freedom, especially the brave 1,000 women who have lost 8 of their colleagues in the recent violent assault of Iraqi forces.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much to the European Parliament to have invited me and having given me the opportunity of sharing with you such an important issue. I would like just to make 2 points where I think I really my experience allows me to tell you something. I was 7 times in Iraq. They did say all the time is that they would never allow to dissociate themselves from the organization, and they would never accept that they would be divided as for, of course, the most important people that the Iranian regime wants to assassinate, for them to be picked up, because they have their solidarity with the whole of the 6,400 members. This is clearly the position either of the leaders or of the common person in Ashraf. There are terrorists there, yes, in the government of Iraq. Mr. Maliki and the other people of the Badr Brigades. They have a curricula, an extensive curricula of terrorism, and they didn't change. They did not change a bit. They are terrorists and they are liars. When they speak about moving the people of Ashraf, they do not at all consider to move them. It's only a technical device to pick them one by one and do whatever they want. Their word cannot be trusted. The only way to deal with them is to show very clearly through the United Nations, well, you have really a lot to lose if you go on behaving like that. Well, there is Gaddafi, there is Assad, and Maliki. Watch it. There is no other way. They don't understand any other language. I am absolutely convinced. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you very much indeed, Paolo. I think our colleagues from the European Parliament, and I hope our colleagues from the PMOI will agree, that of all of the meetings that we've had, this certainly was one of the most productive, in that I think we really teased out in considerable detail real, practical and doable solutions. We need a threefold approach: the United Nations, the US and the EU, to working together in a grand alliance of support for the people in Ashraf. We need to delist the PMOI from that infamous blacklist, because, as has been said plainly and unequivocally, there is absolutely no threat. They are pacifists, they are democrats, and they deserve our full support. And last but by no means least, can I express our deep gratitude to our colleagues from the United States. Your presence here, your solidarity, your support, your eloquence, and your common sense in relation to dealing with this issue is deeply, deeply appreciated. And it gives me great pleasure now to ask our President, Miriam Rajavi, to say a few words by way of conclusion. Over to you, President.
Thank you. Je voudrais remercier tous nos amis européens et aussi nos amis américains qui ont exprimé leur soutien à la résistance iranienne et les résidents d'Ashraf. Ces soutiens sont très précieux et je suis sûre qu'on peut réussir si on accélère nos efforts, spécialement dans ces situations. Et comme vous savez, le printemps des pays arabes est en train de se développer et le peuple de la région veut la liberté et la démocratie. Le peuple iranien, le peuple en Égypte, en Tunisie, en Libye, en Syrie et dans d'autres pays. Mais les mots-là sont des menaces pour ce développement. Et il faut réagir pour aider les aspirations du peuple iranien et du peuple dans la région. C'est pourquoi je pense que nos efforts ici, ce n'est pas seulement pour le peuple iranien, n'est pas seulement pour les résidents d'Ashraf, c'est pour le peuple dans la région et pour le monde entier. Parce que le régime de Mollah est menace pour la paix et la sécurité dans le monde entier. C'est pourquoi je suis sûre qu'on peut réussir ensemble. Merci encore une fois. Merci de votre attention.
خبرگزاری فرانسه، کنفرانس بین المللی در پارلمان اروپا، هشدار به جامعه بین المللی، حفاظت بین المللی اشرف. پارلمانترهای اروپایی و چندین شخصیت آمریکایی چهارشنبه در مورد وضعیت کمپ اشرف واقع در شمال بغداد که مخالفین ایرانی را پناه داده است هشدار دادند. آلخو ویدال کوادراس، نایب رئیس پارلمان اروپا، در جریان سمیناری که در پارلمان اروپا در بروکسل برگزار شد گفت حدود 3400 نفری که در این کمپ اقامت دارند و تحت فشار ارتش عراق می باشند باید توسط کشورهای اروپایی مورد استقبال قرار گیرند. وی نسبت به یک جابجایی اجباری مخالفین ایرانی و پراکنده کردن آنها در عراق هشدار داد و تأکید کرد که چنین کاری آنها را در خطر قرار خواهد داد. ژنرال ارتش آمریکا وسلی کلارک، فرمانده قبلی ناتو، و همچنین سفیر پیشین ایالات متحده در سازمان ملل بیل ریچاردسون به نوبه خود خواستار آن شدند که ساکنان کمپ اشرف تحت حفاظت بین المللی قرار گیرند. خبرگزاری فرانسه گزارش داد خانم مریم رجوی، رئیس جمهور برگزیده مقاومت ایران که در جلسه شرکت داشت، نیز اظهار داشت که هر گونه جابجایی اجباری در عراق زمینه ساز قتل عام ساکنین اشرف است و من به جامعه بین المللی و ایالات متحده هشدار می دهم که مسئول عواقب آن خواهند بود. مریم رجوی گفت 42 نفر از مجروحین حمله 8 آوریل در وضعیت بحرانی به سر میبرند و از مداوای پزشکی محروم میباشند.
آژانس عکس گتی ایمیج سخنرانان در کنفرانس بین المللی در بروکسل، یافتن راه حل دراز مدت برای اشرف. خبرگزاری عکس گتی ایمیج با مخابره عکس‌های کنفرانس بین المللی در بروکسل را انعکاس داد و نوشت برای یافتن راه حل دراز مدت برای اشرف.